welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is Rachel Gregory, your host, and today we have a Q&A episode. It's a solo episode today, and I'm going to be diving into a bunch of great questions surrounding topics that I love to talk about, so I'm excited. Before we jump into today's episode, I do want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Ketobrick. If you haven't checked out Ketobrick yet, you can go to ketobrick.com and you can actually use the code METFLEXLIFE at checkout, and you'll be entered to win a month supply of Ketobricks if you use that code METFLEXLIFE. I will link them in the show notes, and definitely check them out if you haven't already. They have a bunch of really delicious flavors, and I think a new fall flavor coming out soon. So check them out, ketobrick.com. All right, let's jump into today's questions. All right, first question today. How long can someone be in a calorie deficit for weight loss before it's no longer effective? All right, this is a really great question. And this is really one of the reasons why I'm a huge proponent. Wow, I almost said component. Huge proponent of nutritional periodization. And that just means periodizing your nutrition in a very strategic and smart way to incorporate different periods of, if you're going into a fat loss phase, planning that out in a structured way and incorporating diet breaks, incorporating refeeds, then also planning out what happens after the diet. So your maintenance phase, your reverse diet, and then also if you're going into, a building phase or a surplus, these are all components of this concept of nutritional periodization. And so the reason why nutritional periodization is so important when you are embarking on, say, a fat loss phase is because when you diet or you go into a fat loss phase or a deficit or a cut, whatever you want to call it, you will experience something called metabolic adaptation, which is also known as adaptive thermogenesis. So this is a concept that I've talked about before on this podcast a few times, but lots of people actually falsely attribute this concept of metabolic adaptation with having a broken metabolism, which really isn't a real thing. So you can't break your metabolism. And that is something that I think is a huge misconception when it comes to dieting. When you diet, you experience metabolic adaptation. So basically, when you lose weight or body fat, your metabolism actually downregulates as a response to you eating fewer calories, and also your body actually getting smaller or lighter, right? So as you diet, right, you are eating less calories and you are also becoming a smaller version of yourself or a lighter version of yourself. So there are a few main reasons why metabolic adaptation occurs, and these are all related to basically how your metabolism works. So I'm going to talk about a few of these so that you understand them a little bit better. So the first reason why metabolic adaptation occurs is because, like I mentioned, as you lose weight or you lose body fat, your body becomes smaller. You become a smaller, lighter person. And since your body is actually smaller, it requires fewer calories to fuel basic metabolic functions. So basic metabolic functions just means, organ function, breathing, heart rate, all of those. And we refer to this as your basal metabolic rate or your BMR, which you've probably heard of before, or your RMR, which is resting metabolic rate. Those can be used pretty much interchangeably, but BMR, basal metabolic rate, will actually lower as you become a smaller person. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, as you are moving your smaller or lighter body, it requires less energy, right? So you're going to be burning fewer calories and fewer energy when you exercise. So this is referred to as the thermic effect of exercise, basically how many calories you're burning during your exercise. And as you are a smaller, lighter person, you will burn less. So as you diet and you become smaller, your TEE or thermic effect of exercise will become lower. That's the second reason. The third reason is, as you're eating less food, right, you burn fewer calories during digestion. That just makes sense. If there's less food or less calories coming in, there's less to burn during digestion. So this is referred to as the thermic effect of food, or TEF, and the TEF will lower as you diet. So I actually talked really in depth about the thermic effect of food in one of my blog posts that I will link in the show notes, or you can go to my blog on metflexlife.com and you can search the thermic effect of food, with the number one reason why all calories are not created equal. It's part of a series of 4 different blogs that talk about this topic of all calories actually not being created equal. So that's number 3, the thermic effect of food. So the fourth reason is related to a concept known as NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So you're probably going to have less energy due to having less calories or fuel coming in and just being in that deficit, right? So in a subconscious effort for your body to actually maintain what we call homeostasis, which is just another fancy word for its natural balance, and to also prevent further fat loss, you'll move less and you won't even realize it. So you'll start to fidget less, you'll start to do less of the daily activities that you're doing. And that is just part of that subconscious, part of you saying, okay, less energy is coming in, less fuel is coming in. So I'm going to try to conserve as much as possible and not, do these things that I was doing when maybe enough fuel was coming in. So for example, like if you're sitting at your desk during the day, typing on your computer, and maybe like you tap your foot or something while you're typing, as you're in a deficit, you might just stop doing that and not even realize it. And I know that sounds like such a small thing, but it's just an example of these other things that will add up throughout the day, which will add up throughout the week and the month. And that is, again, that's known as NEAT, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So basically, as you take in less energy or calories, you'll naturally expend less energy. So that's the fourth reason. The fifth reason is related to your hormones. So when calories are reduced, levels of leptin, which is the satiety hormone, those levels will decrease. And when leptin drops, your body reduces your natural energy expenditure. And then conversely, levels of ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone, leptin is the satiety hormone, and ghrelin is the hunger hormone, levels of ghrelin will actually rise. And this is obviously going to make you hungrier and make dieting, that's one of the reasons why dieting is difficult and hard, right? So the increased hunger signals, it's another mechanism of your body, trying to maintain your current body fat. And this makes sense, right? So evolutionarily, is that the word? Evolutionary or evolutionary? One of those ones. It makes sense for your body to want to hold on to body fat, especially for women, actually, because we know that there have been periods of food scarcity for our ancestors, right? It was very common for our ancestors to go through periods of feast and famine. Obviously, that's not the case today, but it makes sense evolutionarily. I cannot say that word. You know what I mean? That our bodies would want to, hold on to as much body fat as possible if it knows or notices that we're, bringing in less fuel or less food, right? That just makes sense. And then the last kind of main reason that metabolic adaptation occurs is because of a concept or related to another hormone we have, right? Cortisol. So as you diet, as you get further into a deficit, your cortisol levels will rise. As we know, cortisol is our stress hormone, and an acute rise in cortisol that's normal. That's good. That is what's supposed to happen. But when cortisol is chronically elevated, it's not a good thing. And since dieting is a stress on your body, you're literally putting a stress on your body through dieting. It's obviously going to be associated with increased levels of cortisol. And if we have constantly elevated cortisol levels, it can lead to more release of ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. It can lead to increased stress, poor exercise performance, poor sleep, less recovery and poor recovery, which will lead to even more hunger and even fewer kind of calories or energy burn throughout the day. So these are all part of this concept of metabolic adaptation, but they're all part of dieting. They're all the things that happen when you put yourself in a deficit and you're trying to lose body fat. And these things can become more pronounced the longer that you're in a deficit, right? And so that's why the issue with chronically dieting, I always talk about this, that is why it is such a big issue, because metabolic adaptation can become more and more extreme as you continue to kind of go deeper and deeper into this deficit. So the longer you're in the calorie deficit, the more pronounced all of these adaptations will get. And just on that note too, these are all the physiological adaptations. Like everything I just talked about were kind of the physiological, or what's going on inside your body, right? Dieting is also very hard psychologically, right? And this is the biggest problem that stalls a lot of people when it comes to dieting or fat loss, is you just get so psychologically burnt out and just sick of dieting. and you're not able to adhere to what you're doing consistently to make progress. And this is, again, why it's super important to periodize your nutrition and incorporate strategic and a well-structured plan for the diet, and not just for the diet, but also after the diet. So again, implementing periods of diet breaks and also implementing periods of quote unquote practicing maintenance. These are really, really crucial and very, very important for not just adherence, but also to be able to, get to your goal, but also maintain your goal after you've reached it. So diet breaks and like I said, hanging out at maintenance for a while can actually reverse a lot of the negative adaptations that do occur from dieting and being in a deficit. Again, this will depend on where you're coming from, how much weight you have to lose, how long you've been dieting, all of those factors. But this is kind of, I hope that makes sense, like this overarching concept of metabolic adaptation and why it actually occurs and why your metabolism isn't actually quote unquote broken. So that's kind of, I guess that was a long-winded way of saying that like, these are normal occurrences that occur when you diet, but they can be combated if you do periodize your nutrition properly and implement a structured plan and a smart periodized plan, basically. And then I guess a second kind of part of this question, how do you know when you should actually stop dieting, right? So the first part I mentioned, metabolic adaptation and talked all about that. And the second part of it is, okay, I've gotten to this point. I realize that maybe my metabolism has downregulated. I'm experiencing all of these things. I've been in a deficit for a very long time. But now I'm like, okay, how do I know if I should stop, right? So there's a few like telltale signs that you should consider if you're looking, if you think that you've been in a deficit too long or if you've been dieting too long. So the first thing is constant hunger. And when I say constant hunger, I'm really referring to like unbearable hunger from day to day, right? So just normal day-to-day hunger, you can't seem to shake it. It's like you're completely food focused all the time. You're constantly hungry and it's going on for day after day after day, week after week. That is kind of the first sign. Also realize though, when you are on a diet, when you're in a deficit, you will experience some hunger. That is normal. But when it's constant and it's unbearable for like normal day-to-day functioning, that's when you might have to kind of rethink where you're at and maybe come out of that deficit. The next thing is extreme fatigue. So not just, in your workouts and when you're like exercising, but just with normal daily activities. If you're experiencing extreme fatigue, like you can't even get off the couch or you have no energy to like take your dog out on a walk or throw the trash out, I don't know, just any normal activity, that is an issue, right? That's a telltale sign that you should probably kind of get out of that deficit. And also I'm going to mention a few more, but also with these things that I'm mentioning, if you're experiencing like multiples of these, like if they're all kind of happening at the same time, then that's probably the best sign that you should probably get out of the deficit and just focus on maybe maintaining for a while before you jump back into a fat loss phase if you do have more to lose. But I'll talk about that in a second. So the third one, another telltale sign that you should consider is sleep disruptions. So difficulty falling asleep, if you're constantly waking up in the middle of the night or you're having trouble falling back asleep after you wake up, those are telltale signs that maybe it's time to stop dieting. Motivation is super low. That's another one. So both with like motivation to train or to just even, again, do normal activities around the house. That's another sign. Loss of sex drive is a sign. Lots of different mood swings. So irritability, frustration, anxiety, sadness, depression, all of those things are signs of chronic calorie restriction and typically get worse the longer you diet and the leaner you actually become. So that's something to pay attention to. The next thing would be changes to your body's thermoregulation. So if you're feeling cold all the time, especially if you are on the leaner side and you're still looking to get even leaner, you may notice that you start to feel cold. So this is a sign. And this is actually part of dieting. It's quote unquote normal, I guess, as your body becomes a smaller person, as you are very, very lean and you have less body fat or adipose tissue, you can become cold more easily. So that's another sign. And then lastly, cognitive decline. So the lower your calories get, the less energy you have to fuel your body and your brain overall, right? So energy is going to be partitioned towards vital functions like I talked about before, keeping your organs functioning, keeping your heart beating, breathing, all of these things. And this can actually often lead to even lower energy throughout the day and lower energy to do other things, other daily activities. So those are just a few telltale signs that you should consider to know like if you should maybe get out of the deficit or stop dieting. And a good way to think about it is a good way to kind of put math behind this is if you've been dieting for a period of time, a good rule of thumb is to practice maintenance or practice being maybe in a slight surplus for ideally 1.5 times the amount that you dieted for. So for example, if you dieted for say 16 weeks or 4 months, 1.5 times that amount would be at least 24 weeks or 6 months before you start thinking about going into another fat loss phase if you do have more fat to lose. So 1.5 times the amount that you're in the diet is the amount that you should be at least at maintenance for a period of time before you think about dieting again. This is, of course, though, dependent on how much you have to lose and also how long you've dieted for, right? So you need to take that into consideration as well. In general, the more body fat you have and the more you have to lose, the like quote unquote safer, I guess you could say it is to go back to the diet sooner. But the leaner you are, probably the more time you need to spend at maintenance or in a slight surplus, even if you're looking to build muscle before you jump into another fat loss phase. So hopefully that is a long-winded way of answering this question. It is a question that I can go down a bunch of different routes, but I figured that this would be the best way to kind of explain what really happens to your metabolism, to your body as you diet and as you're in a deficit, and some of the telltale signs to look for if you feel like you need to come out of the deficit or come out of the diet and just, practice maintenance for a while, or maybe even practice being in a slight surplus and building a little bit more muscle. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay, next question. 65 pounds down with keto, can't get below 200 ever. Doing CrossFit and watching calories, what do I do? All right, first of all, congrats on losing 65 pounds. That's absolutely amazing. You should be super, super proud of that. So you said doing CrossFit and watching calories. So I guess when you say watching calories, that would kind of be my first, red flag in terms of what exactly does it mean when you say watching calories? Are you tracking your calories, on a daily basis and tracking your macros? Or are you tracking maybe like one day and then not tracking the next day? Or what a lot of people do is maybe they track during the week and then don't track on the weekends. So that is one thing that I would just make sure that if you are, at a plateau and you feel like you're kind of doing everything right, I would just make sure that you are tracking as accurately and diligently as you can, because we know that tracking is just giving us that objective data to tell us, okay, how much are we consuming? Obviously, it's never going to be exact, but it will give us, a good objective metric to work with. So that would be the first thing. Make sure that you are, tracking diligently for at least a week or two if you are at a plateau. And then to kind of piggyback off of that, as I just talked about in terms of losing weight and losing body fat, you need to make sure that you're still in a deficit, right? So when you lose 65 pounds, as you lost that weight, right, you became a smaller person, like I just mentioned. And your body, as it's smaller, it's going to need less energy and less calories to actually maintain where it's at. So the amount of food that you ate when you were 65 pounds heavier and you were able to lose weight or lose body fat at that amount is probably higher than the amount you can eat right now to achieve the same weight loss. And this comes back to your body just being a smaller, lighter version of you. And that might mean that you have to reduce your calories even more to actually be in that deficit. And this is something that a lot of, this is where it gets confusing, because you were able to lose a lot of weight eating a certain amount of calories, but then you get to this plateau. And the reason you got to that plateau is because you lost a lot of weight. And it's not because your metabolism is, quote unquote broken. It's because of all the things that I talked about in the last question. And mainly probably because you are consuming an amount of calories that actually allows you to maintain your weight rather than further lose weight or lose body fat. So you have to make sure that you're actually still in a deficit, right? So that just comes back to, again, tracking your calories and, over a period of a week or two, see where you're at. If your body weight is maintained over those 2 weeks, that means that you're probably consuming at your maintenance caloric intake, which means that you're going to have to reduce that even further to lose more body fat, right? Or obviously you can increase your activity on the other side of things. But that's kind of a whole other conversation to go down. So hopefully that makes sense. And I actually recently wrote 2 blogs about tracking macros. So I'm going to link those in the show notes. The first one is called Do I Need to Track Macros to Lose Weight? And the second one is called Common Mistakes When Tracking Macros. So definitely check those out. I'll link them in the show notes. And secondly, you said you're doing CrossFit. Okay, so I guess my follow-up questions for this would be, how many days are you doing CrossFit? What type of programming are you following within your gym? Are you sure that you're progressing in your workouts? And are you following, a progressive program within your CrossFit training? So all CrossFit gyms are different and they all have different programming. So with that being said, I talk about progressive overload all the time and making sure that you are, doing a little bit more when you go into the gym and making sure you are progressing. One of the issues with CrossFit and with trying to, body recomposition and also lose weight and things like that is that it's really hard to know if you are progressing on a day-to-day basis, because CrossFit is, you're going in there and you're doing the workout, but you're not really you don't have these objective metrics to really follow on a daily basis because the workouts are just so different. And it's hard, right? So like one workout, you could be burning a lot of calories in, and then the next day's workout, maybe you're doing only, like, for example, maybe you're doing like a 20 plus minute WOD, and then the next day you're only doing like a 5-minute WOD, right? That's a big difference. And that changes day to day, right? So this is something that it's hard with CrossFit and with these other types of workouts like Orange Theory, because they're a great workout. They're a great way to, stay motivated. Whenever you're going to a class and you're competing against other people, it's super easy to stay motivated and it be exciting and fun. But it is actually kind of, it's harder to actually see the progression that you're making. And this is a mistake that I made for a long time. Not that CrossFit is a mistake or Orange Theory is a mistake, but you have to be more aware of what you're doing, especially if you are looking to change your body composition, right? So personally, over the years, just from my experience and experience working with clients, if your main goal is to change your body composition, like lose body fat and gain muscle, then doing CrossFit and Orange Theory probably is not the best way to do that. And the reason for this is because if you are not focused, again, if you want to change your body composition, lose body fat and build muscle, you have to actually be creating that stimulus over and over again to be able to build that muscle and to be able to, track what you're doing. And so if you're doing CrossFit and you're not following a progressive program and not following a program that includes hypertrophy training where you can actually, focus on building muscle, that in itself is probably not going to be super advantageous to your goal. So I would say, and this is something that I wish I did, when I was focused on body composition and when I was doing CrossFit, is that maybe, instead of doing CrossFit, say 4 days a week, maybe you pull that back to doing CrossFit like 2 days a week. And then on the other 2 days, you follow some type of progressive bodybuilding type lifting program, like some type of program like that to allow you to, work some of the muscles that you may not be working in that CrossFit workout. And then on the other side of this is something that I talk about a lot with CrossFit and Orange Theory. It's like, those are super intense workouts. You're always going to be revving your heart rate up. Most of the workouts are high intensity workouts. I did talk about this a lot in the Cardio Confusion podcast that I recorded a few weeks ago. So I'll link that in the show notes. But if your main goal is to lose body fat and you're constantly taking part in high intensity training, you're going to burn out, and it's not going to be a good situation. Trust me, been there, done that many times. We only have so much recovery resources, especially when we're in a deficit and when we're trying to diet. And if you are constantly doing high intensity training day in and day out, it's just not going to be a good situation. So again, you may need to kind of switch things up. Maybe you, instead of doing CrossFit 4 days a week, you do it 2 times a week and then supplement with another exercise program. And if you're interested, I do offer exercise programs on my website at MetFlexLife.com. I'll also link those in the show notes so you can check them out. But yeah, hopefully that gives you some things to work with to hopefully get past this plateau. Alrighty, next question. I feel sick when I try to eat higher carb. To get MetFlex, do I gradually increase carbs? All right, first of all, love that you use the word MetFlex, which we know just stands for metabolic flexibility, and obviously it's the name of this podcast. So if you've been, keto or low carb for a long period of time, this is something that I actually talked about in the episode with Dr. Mike T. Nelson, which I'll link in the show notes. But as you are keto for a long time and you've basically trained your body to be fueled by fat and to run off of fat and ketones for fuel, your body can actually downregulate its production of some of the enzymes that are necessary to actually digest carbohydrates. So if you just think about this practically, it makes sense, because if you're not consuming carbohydrates, then why would your body produce, if enzymes to break down these carbohydrates if you're not consuming them, right? So it's just part of how our bodies are so smart. We've been talking about that in this podcast a lot, but it's just natural. It's part of what happens when you shift to fueling yourself primarily on fat and also ketones. You don't need these enzymes to break down carbs if you're not consuming carbs, right? So that's one of the reasons why I've experienced this myself, and I've had clients experience this themselves. If you're keto and fat adapted, or not fat adapted, but if you're fat adapted, but if you have been keto for a long period of time and you haven't consumed any carbs, you'll probably have a little bit of a struggle digesting carbs the first time you consume them after a long time. And one of the reasons is because those enzymes are downregulated. And so really it just kind of takes some time to upregulate those enzymes again. And it depends on the person, it takes a few days, maybe a week. But once, you do start to consume carbs again, those digested enzymes will start to be produced again. Your body will say, hey, I'm consuming carbs, so now I need these digestive enzymes to kind of wake up and help me to digest these carbohydrates. So that could be one reason. So I would say give it a little bit of time in that sense. And then also just, gradually increasing it, right? So you asked, do I gradually increase carbs? I would. And that is because, especially if you have been, keto for a long period of time, and you haven't introduced carbs recently, this just makes sense, right? So if you have been doing anything, right, it's just like anything else. Like when you stop doing something for a while and you immediately, maybe you bring back carbs in, or you start fasting for a long time and you haven't fasted in a while, or maybe you go months without exercising and you go back to exercising, like that's going to be a little bit extreme on your body, right? Your body is kind of like, okay, wow, I haven't had this in a while, or I haven't experienced this in a while. So I'm going to kind of, take a little bit of time to get used to it again. So I would say definitely gradually increase carbs would be probably your best bet, especially if you are noticing that you're feeling sick or nauseous from consuming carbs. And then the next thing I would say is really focusing on whole food carbs. I mean, I say that all the time, but I would say definitely in this case, if you are feeling sick when you're consuming carbs, I would definitely move more towards like the fruit and the starchier vegetables and not really towards the more processed carbs, just because those are going to be harder on your digestion probably. You know, like I said, our bodies are smart. They want to consume food that is as close to nature as possible. And that would mean carbs that are coming primarily from fruit and vegetables versus maybe carbs that come in a box or a package. So that's something that I would focus on. Another thing, and this is kind of not really related to the sickness feeling, but consuming naked carbs is something that you probably want to avoid as well. And this could be also, if you're consuming carbs on their own, this can really affect your blood sugar, which could cause actually some feelings of sickness, especially lower energy, if you have those blood sugar, spikes and drops. So definitely make sure when you are consuming carbs that you are not consuming naked carbs. So that just means that consuming carbs with some protein or a little bit of fat, not a ton of fat, but a little bit of fat, that's going to help slow down that blood sugar response to those carbohydrates, which will help to balance that out. And then lastly, I would say, this is just in general, but if you are going from not consuming carbs to consuming carbs, I would probably place those mostly around your workout, maybe start with post-workout. And then also you can do pre-workout, but I would place those carbohydrates around your workout to get the most benefit from them, especially if we're talking about recovery purposes and energy purposes and all of that. So yeah, if carbs are making you feel sick, I would say kind of follow that sequence of what I just kind of laid out for you, and focus on those whole food carbs would probably be the number one thing, and gradually increasing them would be your best bet. All right, last question today. Have you researched eating based on your menstrual cycle? All right, so this is definitely a loaded question, and there's probably like so many different routes that I could go down. But I did record 2 podcasts that dive deep into your menstrual cycle and nutrition and so many things related to this with Allie Miller and Dr. Jaime Seeman. So I'm going to link those episodes in the show notes because I think that this will actually definitely, again, this is such a loaded question that I can't pick out like one specific thing to focus on. And in these episodes, we actually dive into a lot of different things related to this. So check out episode 9. It's called Stress and Fat Loss, Hormone Balance, and Carb Cycling with Allie Miller. And then episode 48, it's called Hormones, Birth Control, Carb-Ups, Sleep Hygiene, Resistance Training, and More with Dr. Jaime Seeman. And you can just go and look at the show notes for these episodes to find timestamps based off of, this topic, menstrual cycle, and obviously eating around your menstrual cycle and nutrition. And if you just go in and look at the timestamps and the notes, you can just go to those time frames and listen to those sections if you don't want to listen to the whole podcast. But I mean, I would recommend listening to the whole podcast because there's so many nuggets of information in both of those that are super, super beneficial, and I think would really help. So I will link those in the show notes, or you can also always go to my website, MetFlexLife.com, and just click on the resource tab at the top of my website. It will drop down and you'll see podcast. And if you click on that, that's where I keep all of the show notes for every single episode. So check that out, or just go to the show notes, which you can swipe up if you're listening to this on iTunes, or click more info if you're listening to it somewhere else. And I will link all of that. I'll link those 2 episodes there for you to check out. All right, those are all the questions we have for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you took away some valuable information from this episode. Again, quick shout out to our sponsor for this episode, Ketobrick. If you haven't checked them out yet, go to ketobrick.com and you can use that code METFLEXLIFE for a chance to be entered to win a month supply of Ketobricks. And as always, if you're enjoying this episode, please, or if you're enjoying this podcast, I always mess that up. If you're enjoying this podcast, please make sure to take a screenshot of it as you're listening to it and maybe share it on your Instagram story. You can tag me. My handle is @RachelGregory.cns. Again, that just really helps me to spread the word about the show. And if you want to do something even more beneficial for me and for the show, you could definitely leave a review on the iTunes podcast app. That would be absolutely amazing, and I would really, really appreciate it. All right, I will see you next time.